Welcome to the first episode of the Bonecast, where we talk all things trombone with the people who love it most. If you've ever auditioned for an orchestra or a wind ensemble in the last 60 years or so, chances are you've had to practice this incredibly challenging solo by Maurice Ravel, Boléro. And let's be honest, it's really hard. But why has Ravel's Boléro become both an important piece of music history and one of the most challenging solos for trombonists? Let's dig a little deeper. Here's a refresher on Boléro's origin story, because it's a wild one. Funny enough, Maurice Ravel didn't even want to write Boléro. At least, not the version we know today. It was commissioned by none other than Ida Rubinstein, a dancer, actress, and cultural icon. For lack of a better word, Boléro premiered as a sexy ballet. Born in 1885 in Kharkiv, Ukraine, Ida came from an extremely wealthy Jewish family. Orphaned at a young age, she moved to St. Petersburg with her sister, where she studied dance and became a powerful arts patron. Though she wasn't the strongest dancer, she made up for it with her stage presence, style, and a healthy flair for scandal. In 1908, she shocked Russian audiences and her parents with a performance of Oscar Wilde's Salome. Because the Russian Orthodox Church banned the play, Ida was forced to mime the entire performance. Ironically, this actually made the performance even more provocative. As she danced, she slowly removed all her clothes until only beads and a brassiere remained. Afterwards, worried about maintaining her independence, she married her cousin for legal protection and adopted a pet black panther for good measure. So, what does a scandalous dancer with a love for exotic pets have to do with Ravel? Well, in 1927, after a successful Stravinsky ballet, Ida found herself in a bit of a slump. She reached out to Ravel and asked him to write a ballet with a Spanish character. Ravel was interested and came up with a plan. He'd orchestrate 6 movements from Isaac Albéniz's piano suite, Iberia. Simple enough, right? Not quite. Another composer, Enrique Ferdinand Arbós, had already secured the rights to Iberia, shutting down Ravel's plan before he could even begin. Frustrated by this unexpected obstacle, Ravel came up with something very different. A simple, maybe brilliant, maybe a little crazy idea. He'd write a piece built on 2 melodies, repeated over and over again with increasing orchestration, dynamics, and intensity. And that's how we ended up with Boléro. The ballet premiered on November 22, 1928 at the Paris Opera, with Ida Rubinstein dancing the leading role. For Ida's staging, the setting was a smoky Spanish tavern, later reimagined by others as a factory floor, showing the rhythm of a modern industrial life. The ballet itself was met with polite interest, but it was the music that captivated audiences. Conductors across Europe loved the piece, and Boléro started spreading like wildfire. At its compositional core, Boléro is surprisingly simple. Just 2 melodies passed back and forth between instruments, all on top of a relentless snare drum rhythm. That drum beat is played exactly 169 times without a single break and never changes. But here's what's truly incredible. With every repetition, Ravel hands the melody to a new instrument, building color and tension layer by layer. It's almost like a symphonic big band chart. Each player takes their solo, then passes it on. But when it's the trombone's turn, the trombone solo starts on a B-flat 5. That is pretty high. There are glissandos, there are awkward shifts, there's a top note at D-flat 5, and then you head abruptly back into the middle of the staff. Now, I could sit here and continue to tell you why I think it's so difficult, but let's be honest. I'm still a student, and I'm still figuring out how to be a better player. So I decided to do what any smart musician does when they need guidance. I asked my teacher.
My name is Tony Weikel. I play trombone, of course. And I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I freelance and teach at Capital University, Otterbein University, and Ohio Wesleyan. I'm contracted with some regional orchestras, Springfield Symphony, Morganton Chamber Orchestra, Newark Granville Symphony, and this year with the Richmond, Indiana Symphony. Some orchestras I sub with here and there, Columbus Symphony, Pro Musica once in a great while, West Virginia Symphony, Wheeling Symphony, Ashland Symphony, Central Ohio Symphony. But that's basically what I do in Columbus.
Thanks, Dr. Weikel. So, do you remember the first time you heard or played Bolero?
I actually do remember that. In my undergrad, my first year at Fredonia, my teacher was Barry Kilpatrick. He gave all of his incoming freshmen this packet of orchestral excerpts, and Bolero was in there. It didn't look that challenging at first until I realized that it was in tenor clef. I listened to it, and I realized just how difficult it is. I didn't really approach performing it or playing it until my sophomore year when I started to study with Carl Mazzio, who was at that time the principal trombone of the Buffalo Philharmonic. We started to work on excerpts slowly, and Bolero was very intimidating to me because I always had struggles with my upper register. So that was always maybe the scariest excerpt for a long time.
What made it so scary for you?
I think the biggest thing is the range, and then just being able to sustain playing that high with that much sound for that long. And because it starts on a high B flat and it just stays up there until the second half of the solo. Initially, it's probably more of a mental thing for most of us trombone players, seeing that and knowing what a challenge it is.
Right, very true. Are there any specific practice strategies that you use to improve it?
Yeah, over the years, I've been taught by a lot of different teachers, different ways to work on it, and I've come up with my own. One way was to play it down the octave. That way you can work on pitch, rhythm, sound, style, articulation, and then just being consistent with that all. Play it down the octave with the metronome, with the drone, because it's in the key of C, but we started on the high B flat. So getting used to hearing that minor seventh. Once you can master all of that down the octave, it becomes much easier to play it up the octave where it's written, because you've figured out all the little details and how you actually want it to be performed. Learn it as written but in bass clef, and then just transpose it up by half step until you get to where it's written. And then it doesn't seem as difficult or as hard to get through the excerpt. And after you do that, take it up another half step. And then that way, you're pushing yourself even further. Those D flats just don't seem as high and as difficult once you're able to do that. Those are like the two main ways that I use to work on it.
Those are some really good tips. I'm curious, is there any difference between performing this for an orchestra versus an audition?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. That's a question that I've struggled with a lot in my career, playing for an audition committee versus actually performing. Everybody has a different opinion about that. Some people say you should play it exactly how you'd play it in the orchestra. Then some people say, no, you should play what's on the page as cleanly, precisely, and musically as possible. For an audition, I do it exactly how it's written. I don't add any extra style, dynamics, or articulation. Play exactly what's on the page, and then just focus on those basic things: pitch, rhythm, sound, style, articulation. When you think about performing it, one of my favorite examples is Pete Sullivan from the Pittsburgh Symphony. When he performs it, he adds a lot more personality and spice to it. and it's really fun. I have a couple of recordings of him doing it, even though he may or may not know that. And so I think performing it, there's just so much more room to express. And you don't want to go overboard in the audition room. First of all, you don't want to trip over yourself. And second of all, you want to make sure that audition committee knows that you know how to play exactly what's on the page.
That's very true.
At the same time, though, I had an experience once. I'm pretty sure it was auditioning for the Louisville Orchestra. I played Bolero, and I thought it went pretty well. And then somebody from the committee asked me to play it again, but more soloistically.
That's so crazy and vague.
Yeah, and so I had to just like sit and think, what do they mean? Should I just play it louder? Should I add some more personality? What do they want here? So I just played it again. I tried to play it with just more sound and personality because I didn't want to go overboard. I don't know if they liked it or not. I thought I had a really good chance of advancing, but I did not. Maybe what I did wasn't quite what they were looking for. So you never know. I think they wanted to hear more from me, and I was afraid to give it at the time.
Yeah, I guess auditions can sometimes get away from you.
Right. Yeah, it can go bad for you pretty easily. I've heard that. It's one of those things. I think that's why being comfortable playing it is important. You know, it's not enough just to play it well. You have to be comfortable so that you can express the way you want. And one thing I did forget to mention about practice strategies is I have 3 backing tracks for Bolero. Like 168, another 72, and another 76. And those really help because it's like you're sitting in the orchestra, put the earphones on, and then you can practice it at different tempos and see where you're more comfortable and where you can play your best. And then you can really focus on being consistent with that.
Absolutely. But you want to try to stay true to what Ravel wanted.
Yeah, it can't be played too fast, even though it'd be easier if it was faster because you can get through those high notes quicker. But I think you're right. You have to make sure that you do your study on any excerpt you play, but especially something like Bolero that has so much room for interpretation that you kind of have to understand what Ravel wanted and what the excerpt calls for. And if you're performing it with an orchestra, the tempo and then the style that the conductor wants. The trombone is the last solo instrument to play the B theme before it goes on to more 2D iterations of it. That's another thing to consider, is you're the last solo instrument. Pete Sullivan would always teach me that when you end your solo, it should end strong. Bring the rest of the orchestra in. And you're the first one that gets to show a lot of style with it too. We have glisses written in the trombone part, but our particular instrument, there's a little bit more that you can do to the melody compared to the other instruments. It's like that last statement, and then the orchestra just plays, and then some of that style has to go away because then it's 2D section, and you can only do so much. So there's a lot to think about with that solo for sure.
How do you teach all of these things to your students?
I think the first thing is, before I approach this excerpt with any of my students, I want to make sure that they are comfortable and they have the ability to play up to a high D at least. If they can't, then it's just going to be frustrating and a struggle, and they'll probably get negative results, they'll hate working on it, and they might even hurt themselves. Exercises I use for that are row shoes and tenor clef, or up the octave, high scales, lip slurs, just to try to get them confident and strong in the upper register. And then usually the way I approach it first is I tell them, yes, it's a high solo. The more important thing is that you have all of the fundamentals there. Perfect rhythm and time, great intonation, the right style, the right sound, good articulation so you have control over when the note starts and stops. And that's the most important thing, not focusing on those high D flats, but playing it as you would tuba mirum, where all the details are just right there. So much of the time, my students will play through like the first phrase, and then the second half of it, where it becomes much lower. It's out of time, it's out of tune, the articulation's messy. And it's because they're so concerned about that high stuff that they let everything else go. I remember Pete Ellefson said when I studied with him at IU, even if you chip a D flat, if you play all of it with the right fundamentals, you can probably still advance. Because a chip note's a chip note, we're brass players. But if you chip a note and then play it out of time or play it out of tune, then that's 2 big strikes against you.
Yeah, there's no coming back from that.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I do first. And then we listen to some recordings, get an idea of how the tune goes and how you want to phrase it. And then we start by, doing a lot of the stuff I usually do with all of my other practice techniques for other excerpts and stuff, play without tongue, make sure that you can get from note to note without too much force and mouthpiece pressure, just getting it out. I try to create ease in play up there, just ways to try to not make it seem so overwhelming for my students.
Is that something you take into consideration yourself?
I've never actually played it in the orchestra.
Wait, actually?
Yeah, I've played it quite a few times where I play second trombone. For some reason, just most of the jobs that I do are second trombone. I don't know why. But I have played it a few times on second trombone, and sometimes I feel as nervous as the principal player sitting right next to him, where I'm like, okay, it's coming up soon. Okay, you got this, you got this. I try to stay as still as I can with no reaction when I'm sitting next to the person playing it, to make sure that even if it's not going well or it's going well, that nothing distracts them. I'm like a statue there. I hope that someday I do get to play it, because I would love the challenge of taking it from the practice room, playing it for auditions, playing it for students, and actually doing it in front of an audience. So I hope one day I get to do that, and I hope they don't freak out too much if I do get to do it.
I hope you do too, Dr. Weikel. Okay, one final question. Do you think Bolero will stand the test of time?
I absolutely think it'll stand the test of time, because I think it already has. If Bolero is done right, it can be the most exciting piece you would ever hear live in a concert hall. Audiences love it because of how it goes from basically nothing, just the light taps of a snare drum, to just this chaotic but exciting ending with the trombones glistening and the whole orchestra playing. Just the buildup of how he starts with solo instruments and then adds groups of instruments for colors, and then eventually the whole orchestra's playing. And the snare drum is going nuts back there, just jamming out on the ostinato that he has, or she has. And so it's really exciting. I've seen it many times live, and it's kind of fun to listen to. Bolero is one of those pieces that will just be played forever.
Dr. Weikel did a great job of explaining how Bolero gets taught and prepared. But what happens when you actually step on stage and play the solo with a full orchestra? Since I had a few more questions, I reached out to the principal trombonist of the Columbus Symphony, Vlad Petrachev, to see if he could help.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm a principal trombone of the Columbus Symphony, and I got this job back in March 2025. Got extremely lucky to be here, and also so happy to work with this great band. I love to watch soccer and play video games. I follow Barcelona. It's been 15 years, maybe a little more than that.
That's awesome. Sounds like you've got some fun interests outside of music. Arguably, one of your standout moments with the Columbus Symphony was performing Bolero this past March. What was that experience like, performing it with a full orchestra?
It actually was much, much easier and much more inspiring than I thought it will be. In the orchestra, you have an opportunity to listen to other musicians and also like to hear their ideas on the solo and what they do with their instruments.
That's amazing. Do you remember the first time you had to perform Bolero?
Bolero is interesting solo because we play it on every audition we have, especially as a principal trombone. And it's really scary to play it alone on stage during the audition process. The biggest problem for me was always the first B flat, of course. Again, in the orchestra, it just works really well You get into the music and just enjoy the moment.
It works out one way or another. Plus, you're the last solo to be stated, so you can add your own creative flair with it too.
Yes, and we get pretty comfortable with the dynamics as well. So we don't have to play too soft or too loud.
Absolutely. What do you think is the most challenging part of the solo, in your opinion?
The most challenging part is, of course, preparation for the solo. It's not the solo itself. As long as you know what you're doing, you'll be fine. My advice is always trust the prep, because this is the most important process. Because as soon as you get on the stage, you probably get nervous. And if you don't know what to do, well, it can be even worse. In my situation, when I was preparing for the solo, and I was trying to prepare with the recording, I was trying to imagine the orchestra. I was rehearsing different tempos, trying different breath, short breath, long breath before the first note. I talk about it with Megumi Kanda. Yeah, she gave me a couple of tips on the solo, which helped me to understand what I'm gonna be doing. She said that you have to exhale as much air as you can before the first note until you're almost empty. And then you have to get a really, really big breath and you'll never miss the first note. And that's exactly what happened. As long as you breathe relaxed, all the notes will be there.
Yeah, just trust your air.
Yes, especially when you're nervous. You cannot trust your embouchure. It's always your air.
Were you more nervous playing this for an audition panel than for a full orchestra?
Yes, audition panel is different because when you're playing on audition, you never know what they want behind the screen. You never know what they're looking for. Of course, you're trying to guess sometimes, but the better way to do it is just play and show your ideas. Of course, I was much more nervous on auditions than playing in the orchestra.
Right, because there's that unknown. You can't see who you're playing for.
We had a couple of rehearsals, and it's really inspiring. People come to you and say, it was great, it sounded great. On audition, people don't do that.
True. Have you heard anyone else perform Bolero before?
Yes, I heard a couple of solos before. My favorite recordings are like Jürgen van Rijn with Concertgebouw, Joe Leslie with New York Philharmonic. They're completely different recordings, but I was trying to put them together in my mind and express the sound I have. There's a recording on YouTube, actually. It's pretty funny. Bolero Trombone Disaster.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I don't know the exact story about that, but I heard the principal trombone showed up drunk on the concert. And the second part of the solo was played by second trombone, actually, because he couldn't finish the solo. But I don't know. It's just what I heard. There were no names on the recording.
Maybe that's why they have second trombones play Bolero in auditions.
That's true. That's right.
So, if you were talking to a younger player like me, where would you tell them to start with a solo?
First of all, it depends on where you're playing, audition or the concert with the orchestra. Just start from the basics. Just sing it first. Make sure that you're singing on the notes, you're in tune. Also practice, buzz it with the mouthpiece. Try to buzz it with a piano. Try to free buzz, but not too much because you can hurt yourself. Make sure that you figure out all your musical ideas. And then, yeah, you can start practicing that, how it's written. Also, one thing can help you just to play it louder than you think. It really helps your endurance. As soon as you get on stage playing with orchestra or audition, you'll find it much easier to play because your body is ready. The problem with the high notes, you cannot hesitate. A little bit of hesitation leads to bad things. So, yeah, you just play. Don't even think about failure. Just play. You'll be fine.
Beautiful advice. What do you think the most rewarding part about mastering Bolero is?
It's a good question. The first solo, we also have two more with the trumpet and then tutti with the whole orchestra. Those are really fun too because you can play much louder and you're playing with different people. It's interesting because you can just compare two solos. You can play your own way and then you have to join the orchestra and play the orchestra way. When you're done, I was like, yeah, I can do both. I can express myself with my solo and then I can join the orchestra and play like principal trumpet or principal bassoon. After the piece, when conductor appreciates you, that's really inspiring too.
Yeah, you get your special moment to stand out, but you also kind of get to work as a team.
Yeah, I have 7 minutes to think about it.
Well, yes, it's a blessing and a curse. One more thing. Do you think Bolero will continue to stand the test of time?
Well, we had a pretty good crowd on that concert. One of the best crowds we had in the last season. My mom, for example, she's not a musician, but that's her favorite piece. And she cannot explain it. She just loves it. And there's nothing deep in the piece. It's just two solos all the time. And yeah, it just works for people. I cannot explain why. It has something magical for sure.
Yeah. Vlad, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
As I learned from Dr. Weikel and Vlad, there are so many different ways to even begin mastering Bolero. And to honor Ravel's creative insanity, every trombonist tries their best and gives the solo their all. One final thing. Bolero hasn't always existed in the concert hall. It's now become a full-on pop culture phenomenon. Most of the general public recognizes it long before they even hear it live. A few weeks ago, I was having dinner with my neighbor Bob. When I mentioned Bolero, he immediately said he knew of it, though not from the performance setting I expected.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Parker. I am 66 years old and a neighbor of Grace. I like music, but I'm not a musical snob. I wish I knew more about it. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks a lot.
All right, Bob. I'll admit, until I started researching, I only thought of Bolero as a ballet or an orchestral piece. But you told me you'd first heard it somewhere else. Where was that again?
The first time I heard Bolero was in the movie 10, which came out in 1979. So I was 20 years old. It starred a short actor named Dudley Moore, who was a very famous piano player, concert piano player, but a great actor also in his own right. And it starred an actress named Boderek, who was probably the biggest sex symbol of the late 70s. The movie featured Bolero in a lot of different scenes. Yeah, it caught on. People really understood it to be like this very hot and romantic piece of music. The second place I really discovered Bolero was in the 1984 Olympics. It was in the ice dance competition. The final, there was a couple named Jane Torvell and Christopher Dean. They were a British couple. They chose Bolero as the theme to their final, and it was beautiful, beautiful to watch. I watched it last night. Yeah, it has all this cultural significance, and it's used even today in movies. I'm sure if you went on to Wikipedia or something, you could find a half a dozen movies and TV where it's used.
Sounds like Bolero really started showing up everywhere. When you first heard it, did it make you curious about its background, or did you think of it as just another orchestral piece?
Well, you have to remember the period we were in. So if it was right now, I would get out my phone, I'd pee and read the whole the whole history. But in the late 70s and the mid 80s, it was a little harder to do that.
Yeah, we live in a time where information is a little bit more accessible. So it makes sense that you didn't dig deeper back then. You didn't really have the tools, right?
No, the timeline is just so much easier right now for young people, but it's also harder because there's 50 years more of music to to do since 1979 almost. Yeah, it's much different now to be able to look at musicians and composers and figure out who they are and what they're writing about.
Well, now that you know more about Bolero as an orchestral piece beyond the Winter Olympics, does that change how you experience it in movies, pop culture, or elsewhere?
Yeah, it does. It actually makes me want to like listen to more of it. Forgotten how much I enjoy listening to it, so it's nice to have that opportunity to like look at it, and it's also nice to have the opportunity to research it too. That's the best part about the internet.
Why do you think Bolero, of all Ravel's works, or all orchestral music, has become so recognized in pop culture?
I think there's just certain pieces of classical music that, have this cultural relevance. For people of my generation, that performance in Sarajevo in '84 was just so epic and so burned into our minds that we really associate that with the ice dancing. Sport has a big part of it, especially ice skating. And I think just the sheer elegance of some music, there are some that has become totally associated with things like the William Tell Overture. I mean, we all know the Lone Ranger, so that's sort of my connection to Bolero. I mean, it's a great piece of music.
Definitely. There's a strong connection between classical music and figure skating. Do you see Bolero showing up in contexts beyond ice dancing and sexy movies?
Oh yeah, no, I think it's always going to be out there. I mean, I say that just because I'm an old boomer and I look at how many songs from the 60s and 70s are still used in advertising jingles. So somebody out there, even if they don't recognize it as a beautiful piece of music, will figure out how to make money off it just because it's such an effective piece of music here. Yeah, I think it already has stood the test of time.
Yeah, we'll be seeing Bolero with, Ozempic ads.
So that's actually not a bad idea. I wish I had thought of that. You could make some money on the advertising.
True. Thank you, Bob.
Pleasure's mine, Grace.
Maybe Ida Rubenstein would be happy to see that the piece she helped create so long ago is still everywhere, showing up in movies, ice dancing, and many other places. Bolero has grown so much over the years, and it keeps evolving, a great reminder that art and music never stop changing. And maybe Ravel would be happy too, seeing how his music has stood the test of time and is loved by so many. As long as the trombone solo keeps challenging students and professionals, maybe what makes it so hard is that it forces you to step into Ravel's mind and work together with your fellow musicians. With so many similar solo moments, Bolero is about building something precise and powerful together. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Bonecast, where we talk all things trombone with the people who love it most. A huge thank you to Bob Parker, Tony Weikel, and Vlad Petrachev for sharing their time, stories, and insights, and to Stokes McIntyre, Deb Fote, and Mindforge Studios for helping bring parts of this episode to life. We're also grateful to Kevin Chu and Mark at Dropbox for their support. Music for this episode was provided by Pixabay, Classical Guitar Shed, the Library of Congress, Wikimedia Commons, the U.S. Navy Band, Zapsplat, and the Columbus Symphony Orchestra. And of course, thank you to you, our listeners. Your curiosity and support are what make these conversations possible. If you'd like to support the show, visit thebonecast.com and be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for behind-the-scenes content and special announcements. I'm your host, Gracie Westergaard. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.